Alrighty, welcome back to the big show. She's Perry Ferbert. I'm Jamel Hartman. It's the Daily Hour brought to you by the BAC Group of Companies, Medical House Lenders, and People's Pharmacy. Please do not forget to subscribe on our website. Follow us on all of our social media channels to stay up to date with all that we have going on. Help us grow beyond the mic as we do our part to continue to improve our community. If you haven't already, make sure you give us a like, a love, a thumbs up. Make sure you share the conversation with your friends, your family, your colleagues. Make sure the right people have access to what we're discussing this morning. Without further ado, let's bring a guest in today. Let's give a warm TDH welcome to Taj Donville-Outerbridge. Oops, I'm sorry. There we go. My goodness. Taj, I had to let, they were quiet they forgot how to clap and cheer. Oh, no, how are you doing?
Good morning.
I'm good. How are you?
We're good. First of all, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience this morning. Our audience had a lot of opinions on that topic, man. They had some things to say. But actually, before we even get into the conversation with you, you follow, you do know a little politics and situations. What are your thoughts on the whole Hilton Group and rental apartment thing?
I think many things about it, some things that I'm not going to share today, but I do think in general, the government may be making the right policy decisions. Like this may be a good policy idea, good concept, but one that hasn't been tested, as Perry mentioned, and I think a few people in the comments mentioned, the government is not speaking to the stakeholders that are important to engage in making a decision like this. So it hasn't been tested. And then second, it's not politically savvy. So it's just a bad political decision as well to kind of to do that right now, especially that an election is bound to happen within the next year or so. So it just seems like they don't care, and they've been empowered not to care by the voter base, as you rightly mentioned, because people can't stop voting just because they made a bad decision, unfortunately.
Indeed, and thank you for that. Thank you for that perspective. I think it's aligned with how many people feel. But Taj, before we get into today's conversation, just give the audience a bit about your background and what it is that you do.
Sure. So I am currently a student at LSE, so the London School of Economics, where I study a Master's of Public Administration. Prior to that, I was at King's College London, where I studied global health and social medicine. So I learned a lot about politics and policy, particularly around health. Prior to that, in Bermuda, I've been an activist, social activist for quite a while. I would say I started my activism in youth parliament, which I was a member of for 8 years or so, or 6 years, I believe, going all the way up through the ranks from just a junior, from a member to a youth minister, to the Speaker of the House, the head of youth parliament, to then being an advisor as well. So I went through all the ranks of youth parliament, and I think that is a vital experience that young people should have. And then outside of that, I was involved in the PLP. I was the first chair of the new youth wing that they have, which is the Progressive Minds, the newly reconvened youth wing. And I've also worked on the PLP's campaign in 2017 and 2020. And I write opinion pieces, which I'm sure many people have read, controversial opinion pieces, apparently. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome to the Daily Hour. We don't do controversy on this show, because no, this is a family show.
Never, not us.
Not at all. But I'm glad you mentioned your background in terms of the politics and activism. From your perspective, why is it so important for young people in particular to be engaged in the political process?
I think there are many reasons, and I think there are benefits on both ends, and for the whole society. But there are benefits for the young people, and there are benefits for the politicians that engage young people. So the benefits for young people, there are several studies out there about the importance of civic engagement. It improves academic performance, it improves mental health and well-being, it improves your sense of belonging in your society as well, which could be a solution or part of the solution to address gang violence, voter apathy amongst young people, etc. Getting them engaged in the political process could be part of the solution to addressing those problems. And we haven't really seen much discussion about the importance of civic engagement in reducing gang violence, but that is a critical link that I think should be explored. And then on the politician side, young voters, young people have new ideas, fresh perspectives, new ideas, and also they're volatile. And when I say volatile, I don't mean that in a negative or positive way, just that they're more susceptible to change. Young people are growing and developing, and we change more rapidly than older people. So politically, we tend to vote with our values more so than with being attached to a particular political party. There are huge values in engaging young people because we kind of move around the political spectrum. We can be a key voter demographic for parties seeking to, let's say, oust a significant majority government.
I agree with that. I think there are definitely benefits on both sides. When I was politically involved, when I was your age, we had, I wouldn't say different because I don't know what your issues are right now, but our issues back then, I mean, legalizing weed, which still kind of hasn't come to fruition, was a big thing. A lot of things were race-based in Bermuda that we were fighting against. My big issue was conscription in particular. Of course, there's still reparations conversations going on, but I think every generation has its cause, right, or causes. What are some key issues and causes that you're involved in, and people that are politically engaged in your age group? What are some of the causes today that you're fighting for?
I mean, I think the big one that I think is a cause of concern for everyone is the cost of living, particularly for young people returning home from university. As a discussion today, there's a lack of affordable housing, lack of job opportunities outside of international business. So Bermuda's not a very favorable environment, not just for internationals, but for young people who go away to get all this academic expertise to come back and contribute to the society. There's no real incentive to encourage that currently. I think that's a big issue. I think another big issue is climate change for young people. That's very important. That's kind of at the top of the priority list, I would say. And I think human rights is another one as well, and kind of social justice in terms of both LGBTQ plus rights, socioeconomic status. When you look at the private school divide versus the public school divide and the resources or opportunities that are afforded there, I think those are all conversations that young people are having. Those three, I think, would be the most pertinent, topical concerns of young people in my demographic.
So with those concerns, how do you feel the politicians, or in your experience, how are the politicians receiving these concerns? What's their interaction like with these issues?
Unserious. That's what the interaction is like. I mean, I don't know if either of you saw the panel discussion amongst the candidates for C36, but you saw that there's a lack of knowledge, but also like any kind of political or policy position on those areas. It's just, we have to wait and see, or I have to consult my members, or et cetera, et cetera. There's no real policy positions on those three issues. How can we solve those problems? No one in the government is really saying, or the opposition, or any of the opposition parties is really suggesting how we can address those issues. I think that is a huge problem. And I also think politicians don't tend to take young voices seriously. One, because as I mentioned, we're not a reliable voter base. So we change in the way in which we vote or we don't vote. We're more susceptible to voter apathy. So we're not a reliable voter base. So there's no real incentive for the government to engage young people, if you get what I mean.
I do want to.
Yeah, exactly. So they don't take what we say seriously, and there's a lack of formal kind of institutions to facilitate that engagement around these issues as well. Like I sit on the World Health Organization Youth Council, for example, and I met some young women from Jamaica, and they were telling me about their experiences with the government. They sit on 3 different national advisory boards for climate, for human rights, for digital transformation. Bermuda has no such youth advisory boards for key issues. Yes, we're a small jurisdiction, and so we might not need as many, but I don't see why each ministry couldn't have a youth advisory board, or at least a young person on every statutory government board. That we're not even at a place to have that conversation yet. So you can't talk about meaningfully engaging young people if you haven't made the pathways and given them the tools to engage meaningfully.
Wow. I'm kind of digesting as you're speaking, because these are things that the average person is not even considering, right? How valuable the input of youth is for all of the elements that you listed earlier, like well-informed, not necessarily making a decision based off of their own opinions, but off of core values that are either being presented or not. And that's very valuable, to have that ear on the street, so to speak. So that is incredible. So sorry, I'm just digesting. What other what other challenges, or what challenges I should say, are you facing in getting more young people involved with these initiatives? Do you think they just are tapped out? They don't want to care? Like what challenges are you facing?
Well, voter apathy is common across all age demographics currently. I think people are just kind of politically exhausted. I think that's a big thing, especially in the US and in the West in general. Young people are politically exhausted just because of we were flooded with Donald Trump, and in the UK you were flooded with the Tories and kind of the crazy far right things that they were doing. So I think young people are just politically exhausted in terms of seeing those, and then feeling like, one, their voice doesn't matter, and two, not having any meaningful ways to engage, as I mentioned earlier. So I think it's not that young people don't want to vote. I don't think that would ever be the issue. I think the issue is that, one, we don't know enough about the political parties. Political parties in Bermuda do a very bad job of, one, marketing their manifesto, and two, kind of engaging young voters, whether that be on social media, whether that be through public debates, panel discussions, etc. Bermuda's political system has never done that until recently. And kind of the only do a canvassing, a lot of young people are away at school. So politicians will never encounter a large demographic of young people who are away studying at university. And then when they do show up on the door, I've seen this in my own eyes and heard it from other young people. If I, for example, this is just an example, if I go and open the door to my MP, this is an example, not speaking.
Hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically, if I go and answer the door to a politician or to a canvassing, the first thing they ask is, "Oh, where are your parents?" They don't ask me what are my political concerns or if I'm going to vote for the party, because what they're understanding is that, oh, this family is PLP, so everyone in this family is going to vote PLP, or this family is OPA, everyone is going to vote OPA. So they don't even spend the time to engage with young people about what their challenges are, what their experiences are, what their opinions are of how the government is doing and what they could be doing better. So I think, one, on the doorstep, they could do a much better job of engaging, but they could also engage more nationally, like through social media, through a public debate, which I know Bermuda Youth Connect has been calling for the last few elections, and we have not seen that happen yet. So those, I think, I hope that answers the question.
So that was more on the, and my apologies, that was a great answer. My apologies for not wording it the way I was thinking, but so that was more for voter apathy. What about advocacy? How do we get more individuals for advocacy? What challenges are you facing in getting more young people to advocate for the issues that they are facing?
I think it's because a lot of young people, especially those who are probably would be engaged, are, like I said, away in university and thus have no way to engage. And a lot of things in Bermuda are in person. Even myself, who's away studying in the UK, and I'm someone who's very politically engaged by comparison to other young people. And I even struggle to find meaningful opportunities just because they're always in person. And only a certain demographic of young people can afford to fly home for particular opportunities. So when you're looking at the types of opportunities that are available, and considering that young people may have to travel to Bermuda, or when the Premier, for example, visits London, always does his events in London, not considering that there are young people based outside of London and the cost of traveling to such a venue. So there's always, so that's a institutional, I guess, challenge. But I think young people are just, we're just not empowered. I think that is the key thing. And it's not that anyone has to empower you, but there has to be an effort on both sides to make you feel like your voice has value. And my whole life, I was told my voice didn't have value. One, because I was young. Two, because I was queer. So my entire childhood, I was told that I didn't have a voice. And in youth parliament, that was where I was able to find out that I did have a voice, and other young people have a voice. I don't know what is happening with youth parliament. I don't think it survived COVID in the same way that it did pre-COVID. So that's an area where the government could be throwing investment. But once again, that's not something that sounds politically savvy. It's like it's not something to get voters out, I suppose. It doesn't, in their opinion anyway, it wouldn't be something that attracts votes, so they wouldn't put any money towards it, even though it's vital to ensuring that young people are engaged.
Okay. Well, so there should just be more pathways to that. So, and you touched on it earlier. Yeah.
More pathways. Starting in education, starting when you're in secondary school, particularly, not just when you turn 18. The opportunity should start when you're in middle school, when you're in high school. They should start there.
Very, very solid points.
And the education should start there. And that's a critical part that's missing as well. Is the civic
they just don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So they can't even, their interest can't even be piqued because they don't even know. But very, very valuable information. The Bermuda Youth Connect actually held political discussions with all candidates except for one. Why was that discussion necessary? Why did we need to have that conversation? Inform the public.
It's vital, it's vital to hear each candidate's and each leader's opinions, views, policy positions, in a public forum so that you can compare them directly. Because it's one thing to read paper, and it's one thing to listen to a carefully crafted speech, and it's another thing to listen to how they respond to questions and how they engage with each other across the political spectrum. And that can give you a lot more insight. And in America, and America is a perfect example. Very few people read the manifestos very few people have read Kamala Harris's manifesto. But they surely listen to the debate that her and Donald Trump had, right? And they surely listen to the town halls, because that is what people want to hear. They want to hear how the politician kind of lays out their platform. So those are important for everyone, not just for young people. But it's also important to hear, I mean, these happen in America, these happen in the UK, but they have demographic-specific town halls, where that demographic gets to ask the politician, hey, what are you doing for us? What are your plans for us? And I think that's an important mechanism that, once again, we don't have in Bermuda as much as we should. But that's an important mechanism to ensure that everyone is engaged in the political conversation, but also so that people can advocate for themselves. It's creating this space in which people can say, hey, I have a concern, but there is in a safe space where they're surrounded by people of shared lived experience. So that's why it's important to have it specifically for young people. That's also why it's important to have it more generally as well.
Yeah,
I like all the points. Sorry, go ahead, Jamal.
No, I like what he just said, because I was called ignorant just last week because I was reading all of the platforms: Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Jill Stein, Cornel West, Chase Oliver. Like, I actually did that because I think in the U.S. case, and it's almost like Bermuda as well, right? Bermuda's become this face, but in the U.S. of 330 million, we've literally been told that we only have two choices, right? Which is crazy in itself. And we don't realize the choices that we're given are the ones backed by the very people we're supposed to be voting against, which is the billionaires, right? The billionaires and the 1% support either of these two parties. But I'm called ignorant because I should just vote against somebody rather than for someone. And I would encourage everyone. While I'm grateful for what Taj just said, I am. He's right. Like, a lot of people are not going to read. So you need to bring them there where they'll actually be able to listen and engage. I think it's our duty. You know, Perri said earlier, like, about voting. And I agree with her, but we've got to read. We've got to understand what we're voting for, right? And even my ignorance last week I don't know if you all know what a U.S. ballot looks like, but there are a lot of people to vote for, a lot of things, key issues. I didn't know about the key issues, right? I didn't know about the housing, yes or no. Like, I did not know. So for me to have it easy in that context, in terms of, you know, you're literally just you're not voting on issues. I mean, they had a referendum some years ago. I mean, they've had referendums, let's say, every 10, 15 years, but other than that, for a person. So you need to kind of understand the platforms. You need to be engaged. And because Bermuda Youth Connect might say, you know what, we don't have the time, we don't want to do it. And then what, right? So I appreciate that. But audience, I'm going to come to you because we've got some people in the audience. And if you have any questions, comments, send them through. Mark Arthur T. Phillips says, unfortunately, in some cases, even this present age, some think that young people should be seen and not heard. This is wrong. Charles H. Jeffs II actually has a question. He says, what are Mr. Donville-Outerbridge's thoughts on the growing disdain for party politics in Bermuda? Does he believe independent candidates are a good thing for Bermuda, considering our history?
I think party politics is has its challenges. It has its benefits. Don't get me wrong; it definitely has benefits, but it definitely has its challenges. And I think independent candidates are a good alternative. But it's important to hold every individual MP you are electing to account. So when your MP comes to your door, when your candidates come to your door, it's equally important to hold them all accountable. People like to apply additional pressure to independents, but you need to hold all political candidates to the same accord. They all need to have policy positions. They all need to be able to articulate the party or the individual aims, wishes, positions clearly. But I do think independence could be a good alternative. Could be a good addition, not even an alternative. Could be a good addition to our current party system, two-party system.
Charles H. second, another question. He says, what are Taj's thoughts on Bermudians living outside of Bermuda being able to vote in Bermuda elections, maybe with House of Assembly rep for all Bermudians living outside of Bermuda? Like myself, they removed me from the registry. But go ahead.
I was actually having this conversation in one of my classes on political science, and we were discussing voter power. And one of the key things, and when I mentioned that in Bermuda we don't have absentee ballots, people looked at me like I was crazy. So just to say, Bermuda lives in 1980 on this issue. Absentee ballots are common in most jurisdictions. It's all people vote at embassies for larger countries. They're able to go and vote at the embassy, at their country's embassy in their respective residence. But in Bermuda, we have no way for young people to engage, young people or anyone living outside the UK to engage in the political system. And I think that's a huge flaw. And I think it shouldn't be that difficult, particularly in the UK, to set up a voter booth at our consulate office or anywhere, given that we're a territory of the UK. So that shouldn't be a complicated thing to do. And I think that's a good place to start. Obviously, not all Bermudians live in the UK, but that's a good place to start. Start there and see how that works as a test, and then go from there. But there's been no real political movement from either of the main parties. The FDM has mentioned it, but the OBA nor the PLP have made any commitments around absentee ballots. And I think that's a shame, because it's a real important issue that we're overlooking.
The first time I heard it mentioned politically was from the OBA's platform in 2012.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Yeah, but you're right. Like, it's like that was 12 years ago already, right? And I actually echo what you said just now. Like, no party sees that as a major issue. Like, you don't hear them discussing it or talking about it. That is strange.
The parliamentary registry did talk about it. So at that time, 2012, and that's why I was going to mention, I was working there, and I do remember discussion around it. But again, that was 12 years ago, and there has been no implementation around that. But yeah, I hope that this interview falls on the right ears, because you have shared a lot of very valuable information, not just from a youth perspective, but a solid perspective in general, and the things that we really need to address around listening to the correct stakeholders and then implementing that information across the board, across age. Because someone has asked what your age, and I think that that's irrelevant, right? It's core and real values that are being brought to light that should just be heard regardless of the age. So
correct. Yeah. And thank you for that. Thank you for that, Perri. Seriously. One last question before you head out, Taj. In your opinion, what is the one thing that has improved in the political space in Bermuda?
That has improved?
Yeah.
I think one thing that has improved is the diversity of candidates. So this election, we have the potential of having 4 candidates in every seat. I think that's a huge leap forward in progress. And you have more choice. That's probably the only thing that has improved. Most things have gotten worse in terms of Bermuda's political space.
I think that benefits the PLP. What are your thoughts on a coalition government?
I think that once again has its challenges, and it can be extremely volatile. But ultimately, the opposition, the OBA has already ruled it out. Let's make that clear. The OBA has already said that they're not interested in that. But the only way the PLP is losing, is if the OBA, the FDM, and the independents become more strategic around how they run candidates, where they run candidates, and kind of pool their resources as well. That's the only way in which a supermajority government is going to lose like this to a disorganized opposition. Otherwise, they have the chance.
I mean, you know what Perri just said? She hopes the writers are listening. honestly, man, I said it after the what's it called, the recent by-election. If
Yeah.
folks put ego aside and listen to what you just said, then it's possible. Like I think,
They have a chance.
yeah,
If
and I'm
they
not.
organize correctly, yeah, but it's also listening, because
Yeah.
that's our discussion
Bingo.
today, right? Like listening to the right people, and not just listening, because being aware of a burning building doesn't stop the building from being on fire. So listening, but also implementing, I think,
Correct.
go solidly hand in hand, and it can be effective
Yeah.
if done correctly. So
But
yeah,
they're not willing. Ultimately, we've seen they're not willing.
Yeah.
The leaders are not willing to do it. So
I think the
there you go.
majority, because I do think within each party there are, today is
Sure.
National Use Your Common Sense Day. I do believe that there are a lot of people that are critically thinking, but their voices are overheard. I mean, not heard, I should say, because of majority. So
Mhm.
And I think it would be good to get new fresh faces as well. I think that would be a huge help, because currently what we have is all people from the same parties. So you have Mark Bean, who's former PLP. You have John Swan, who's former UBP. You have Renee Webb, who's also helping the Independents, who's also former PLP. So you're not really getting anyone new, right? It's just kind of recycling the same.
But we've had those conversations on this show for ages that attracting like the best in politics just hasn't been the norm over the last 20 years. Like, you know,
who wants to do that?
right. I was just going to say,
Who wants to do that?
you might want an entrepreneur like a Perry, and Perry's like, no.
Listen, let's just retract all of that in Jesus' name. Let's just wipe it off.
But that's the thing. Like, it's hard to attract the people who will probably be best, and I don't blame them. There was a period when Bermuda probably attracted the best, and so in saying that, I have one last question for you. Trust me, want to go who you have. But one last question: How do we go about attracting Bermuda's best to the political space?
In politics, I don't know if you'll ultimately not. Let me be careful what I say there. Technocrats, so people who are good at understanding, like, have a very solid knowledge of a particular field. For example, a Curtis Dickerson is an example of someone who would be considered a technocrat.
Yes.
They don't tend to do well politically. They lack political savvy. So what you often get is people who have political savvy, and unfortunately, political savvy is often combined with self-interest. So people who are the most self-interested often end up being the most politically savvy, and ultimately end up being the most successful politicians. So I guess it's more so about training, and this is a conversation that even I'm having in my degree as well, learning about how, like, people who have particular specialties in fields should understand politics and how politics interacts with that. So politics should be a key part of our education starting from primary school. That, I think, is the key. And shifting our understanding of how politics operates. So that takes a longer period of time. I don't know if you're going to get the best and brightest in politics today, just because the best and brightest would never get elected, because they would never be politically sound, right? Very rarely would they be a politically attractive candidates.
Unless they underwent that training, right?
Exactly.
I mean, the proof in what he just said is in the pudding. I mean, it's been proven 2 years ago with Curtis Dickinson. I mean, he's right. And based on what you just said, the way you said it, it's unfortunate, but
very.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, some of the best people, they're not going to be people. They're not going to kiss babies. They want to just do the work, do what's necessary to help, move things along. And you know what? I don't need nobody kissing me and hugging. I keep saying, I'm that one person. You don't need to tell me what you've done for me. I'll feel it. Touch.
And you're probably rare in that. Most Bermudians,
I am. Trust me. I get it. I get it.
A politician that's going to be nice, be on the doorstep, speak to them when they cross, and then politicians get criticized when they're not friendly. So,
and I get it. Go ahead.
I know we have to wrap, but what I want to say is the value of, and I'm not just saying this from a biased standpoint, but the value of, let's say, a platform like the Daily Hour helps to insert more discussion around things to shape people's opinions, right? So they might then be like, well, I actually don't need this person to shake my hand and kiss my baby. I've heard on the Daily Hour X, Y, and Z. Let me think more a little bit about that. Because if it's not even being presented to you to think about, the average person might not even think about it, because your great-great-grandmother, your grandmother, your mother, your father, everybody's just said this is how we do it. And because that is where your loyalty lies, is that's how my family does it, so that's how we do it, without actually thinking about the critical matter. So these sorts of spaces are very important. So I think if we had more of this open discussion, not to bash anyone, but just to talk about the facts, more people would open up their minds to consider the actual facts. So then the people who are, let's say, like a Curtis Dickinson, stand a better chance in public space because they're actually speaking facts, right? So there's that too.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Taj, start a run. This has been an awesome conversation. Definitely have you back sometime. There's a lot more we can discuss. So thank you for making time for us. Honestly, really appreciate you. And we'll be in touch.
Yes.
All right. Taj Donville-Outerbridge, folks, if you appreciated that conversation this morning, please give us a thumbs up, a love, a like. Man, we could have went on and on and on, but
I know I wasn't ready for that to end.
Stick with us. We're going to take our last break, 57 seconds. We'll be back with the Daily Play, and Perri will give you some daily inspiration as well.